You're not the homeowner. You're just holding it until your brother is ready." Those words were spoken right in the middle of the living room, in front of the old fireplace Hannah had restored herself over the past 3 years. A historic house in Savannah, titled in her name, the mortgage paid by her, the property taxes paid by her. But that night, her parents declared it had never truly belonged to her. And her brother, who had just gone bankrupt, was the real heir. And that is the story of Hannah Brooks. People often say, family is the safest place. But what if that place starts rewriting history in a way that benefits them? Would you have the courage to go back and examine every document you once trusted? And I'm Lisa. Before I tell Hannah's story, let me ask you something. What room are you listening from right now? A house in your name, or a place you think is yours? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe, and stay until the end, because some truths only come out when it's already too late. That night, I came home earlier than usual. The front door was still the ivory shade I had repainted last spring, but inside, my office had been cleared to one side. My desk pushed against the wall, half the bookshelves empty. File boxes stacked as if I were preparing to move. My father stood by the staircase. He said Caleb would be staying for a while. Temporary. The word sounded light, almost like a promise. My mother stepped out of the kitchen, drying her hands on her familiar striped towel. She said the house had been purchased in the family's name, that I was only the one on paper because the bank trusted my credit profile more. I looked up at the wooden ceiling beams I had sanded plank by plank. I remembered the humid Georgia afternoons when I climbed the ladder to replace the light fixtures myself. The roof repair bills after the fall storm. Every property tax check I signed and mailed on time. My father walked closer. He placed his hand on my shoulder, not hard, but firm enough that I didn't step back. He said quietly, evenly, "You owe the family this opportunity." The sentence wasn't loud, but it sat in the room like a crack splitting through plaster. I didn't argue. I went straight to my bedroom, opened the small safe at the bottom of my closet. The mortgage file was still intact in its navy folder. I laid it on the kitchen table and flipped through the pages. The down payment from 3 years ago was clearly listed, $75,000. A family contribution I had believed was an early wedding gift, even though I had never been engaged. The transfer had come from my parents' joint account. At least, that's what I had always thought. I pulled out my phone and reopened the old bank statement saved in my email. The screen lit up the dark kitchen. The number was still there, but the sender's name was not my parents'. My heart stuttered when I read the line above that deposit. The sender's name appeared clearly, R.B. Heritage, LLC. I scrolled down and zoomed in on the transaction details. The transfer date matched the day I signed the purchase agreement for the house, not a personal account, not a gift, a company. I opened my laptop and quickly searched the Georgia Business Registry. RB Heritage had been established 6 months before I bought this house. The managing member, Robert Brooks. The contact address, my parents' home. I scrolled to the tax information. The social security number used for registration was mine. I sat still for a few seconds, my hand resting on the kitchen counter. The stovetop clicked softly, still warm. 3 years ago, when I signed my first tax documents after moving to Savannah, my mother had said, "Let your father handle the investment side. You don't need to worry about complicated things." I had handed him the paperwork without reading every line. I carried the laptop into the living room. My father was still there. Caleb was in the backyard, speaking into his phone in a low, hurried voice. I set the laptop down on the coffee table and turned the screen toward them. "What is RB Heritage?" My father glanced at it, then sat down in his armchair as if this were just another ordinary conversation. He said it was a tax structure, a way to optimize family assets. My mother nodded, her voice steady, telling me not to make this into something bigger than it was. It's a strategy to protect shared assets, she said. You benefit from it. I kept my voice level. That company is registered using my social security number. The silence stretched for a few beats. Caleb walked in and stopped in the doorway. My mother looked directly at me. If you were a good daughter, you wouldn't be asking questions. Has anyone ever been labeled the good child simply for staying silent? If you've experienced that, leave a dot in the comments. The sentence dropped like a pair of scissors slicing through the air. I didn't respond immediately. I opened another saved file in my email, the latest property appraisal. The house had been revalued 2 months ago. Its value had increased by nearly $120,000. Under the notes section was a line that read, "Property used as collateral for supplemental loan. Borrower name, Caleb Brooks." If I was the homeowner, why hadn't I been told? I closed the laptop and stood up. No one stopped me. No one asked me to sit back down. Caleb looked at me like a clock counting down. My father avoided my eyes. My mother adjusted her pearl bracelet as if staying calm would return everything to its proper place. The next morning, I drove to the local bank branch on Abercorn Street. The building was low, red brick, the air conditioning blowing out dry, cold air against Savannah's sticky humidity. I asked to speak with a loan officer, handed over my ID, and said plainly, "I want to see every file connected to the house in my name." The employee studied her screen for a long moment and asked me to wait. When she returned, her expression had changed. She said my house had been reappraised to support a loan of about $300,000. The beneficiary was Caleb. "It's for debt restructuring," she said quietly, as if afraid I might hear the truth too clearly. I asked what debt. She pointed to the purpose, tied to a restaurant chain. Caleb had expanded too quickly, and now the bank needed solid collateral. In that moment, Lisa's voice seemed to slip in between the sound of the printer and the scent of fresh paper. A historic house in Savannah, a loan hanging in the balance, and a daughter beginning to understand she was only the legal shell. Who truly owns what? I took a breath and kept my tone steady. I didn't argue at the counter. I simply requested copies of all mortgage files and appraisal changes. The employee hesitated, then handed me a stapled packet along with a link to download the digital records. I flipped to the signature page. My electronic signature was there, neat and rounded, but under verification it read, "Confirmed via linked email." It was an old email address I hadn't used since moving to Savannah, the one my mother had once said she would hold on to so no family information would get lost. I folded the papers. My hands were cold, my throat dry as paper. I didn't go home right away. Not yet. What I needed now was the one thing they couldn't dismiss, evidence solid enough that no one could call this a private family matter. I didn't drive straight home after the bank. I turned into another branch a few miles away and opened a new account in my name only. No notifications, no linking, no secondary access. The teller handed me a temporary card. I slipped it into my wallet like a small knife, not to attack, but to protect myself. That afternoon, I logged into the Airbnb account for the upstairs room. Bookings were full through the end of the month. I changed the payout method and redirected all income into the new account. It wasn't a large amount, but it was enough to know I still had a stream of money no one else could touch. The next day, I met with a real estate attorney in the historic district. His office was in a house much like mine, except everything inside was orderly, and no one was arguing over ownership. I didn't talk at length. I placed copies of the mortgage documents and the email verification page in front of him. He put on his glasses and read slowly. When he looked up, he said, "If you can prove unauthorized access, the loan could be voided." The sentence wasn't loud, but it opened a door. I didn't file anything immediately. I asked what would be required to prove it. IP logs, login history, evidence of control over the email account. He wrote down a short, clean list. That evening, I came home at dinner time. Caleb talked about his restructuring plan. My father asked whether I planned to shut down the Airbnb room to reduce complications. I took a bite and answered just enough. No one mentioned the bank. After dinner, I placed a small camera on the bookshelf in my office, not to trap anyone, but to record any access to my documents. At 11:47 p.m., my phone vibrated softly. Motion alert. I opened the app. On the screen, my mother was sitting at my desk. She opened my laptop and typed in the old password I had used throughout college. Her hands did not shake. I kept the screen open for a few more seconds. My mother sat upright at my desk, the yellow lamplight falling over her hair. She wasn't rummaging. She moved precisely. Opened email. Located the bank message. Clicked the confirmation link. A dialog box appeared on the camera screen. I couldn't read all of it, but I saw the number clearly. $50,000. A supplemental loan. I stood up. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked downstairs and straight into my office. She was still looking at the screen when I opened the door. "We need to talk," I said. She paused, then turned toward me. No panic. No fumbling. She simply closed the laptop and rested her hand on it. "It's the only way to save Caleb," she said. "The bank needed additional assurance." "Through my email?" "Your family." Her voice stayed even. "You understand." Caleb had once told me I was too practical, not emotional enough. At the time, I had laughed it off. Tonight, that comment felt like a shard of glass lodged in my throat. "I was never informed," I said. "It's my house." "It's our house," she replied. "And if you love your brother, you won't turn this into a problem." I didn't argue further. I opened my phone and sent a brief email to the bank's fraud specialist, attached the extracted camera footage, listed the exact timestamp, no emotion added. Half an hour later, my phone vibrated. The bank confirmed receipt and stated they would open an internal investigation. They instructed me not to proceed with any transactions related to the property until verification was complete. Lisa's voice came through like a pause between two breaths. "Some families think blood ties are a permanent power of attorney, but when the law steps in, every emotion has to give way to the wording on the page." I looked at my mother again. She didn't say anything else, but for the first time, I could see she wasn't as certain as before. 2 days later, the bank's fraud specialist called me back. He confirmed they had pulled the login records. The IP address matched the internet network at my house. The timestamp matched the exact video clip I had sent. He asked me one short question. "Do you want to file a formal report?" I stood by my bedroom window, looking out at the old oak trees in the front yard. The early summer wind moved through them, the leaves trembling as if nothing had happened in this house. Filing a formal report meant the bank would put it into a legal record, no longer something in the kitchen, in the living room, black and white, on paper. That night, my father knocked on my door. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Do you want your mother in a legal record?" he asked. It wasn't a threat. It felt like a mirror held up in front of me. I could see myself in it, a daughter weighing a boundary. Caleb didn't say a word to me after that, but I watched him recalculate numbers at the dinner table. His phone rang constantly. I logged into Airbnb and paused new bookings. The cash flow from the upstairs room slowed. Not much, but enough to leave a gap. Pressure stacked up in layers. Guilt slid in between the numbers, but every time I looked at the mortgage file, that feeling fell back. The next morning, I called the bank specialist again. I stated clearly, I was confirming unauthorized access to my email and financial records. I agreed to proceed with a formal investigation. On the other end, he only said, "We'll document that." I hung up. The house was quieter than usual, but for the first time, that silence didn't make me hesitate. 3 days later, the bank sent an official notice. The supplemental loan was frozen until the investigation was complete. No more disbursements, no restructuring, no extensions. Caleb read the email at the dinner table, his face going pale. His phone kept ringing. I caught fragments like, "It's just a temporary procedure," and "We'll fix it soon." But his eyes didn't look convinced anymore. I took the saved copies to the attorney's office. He prepared a petition to remove the lien against my house due to signs of unauthorized access and invalid authorization. I signed my confirmation, this time reading every line carefully. That afternoon, I stood at the front gate. The wooden sign carved with Brooks Family Estate still hung beneath the bougainvillea. I used a screwdriver to take it down. The screws hit the concrete with a dry, sharp sound. I replaced it with a new sign, smaller, with just one line. Hannah Brooks. If you've made it this far, what are you feeling right now? Leave an emoji that matches it. No one came out to stop me. That night, I placed the printed verification results in front of my parents. IP address, timestamp, device used. Everything was clearly printed, without emotion. I didn't say much. I just slid the stack toward them. My father flipped through a few pages. He paused longer at the email verification section. He simply set the papers down and sat in silence. For the first time, I saw him without an explanation ready. The attorney called me the next morning. He added one more detail. R.B. Heritage, registered using my social security number, could face a tax clawback if it was reviewed. He asked whether I wanted to expand the case. I refused. I only requested that all guarantees connected to my property be withdrawn. A week later, Caleb listed the boat he still kept docked near Tybee Island. The boat that had once been his pride every Thanksgiving was now on a classifieds page with the words, "Must sell." Everything moved faster than I expected, but the price I had to pay wasn't money. The following week, the house was strangely quiet. Caleb moved out first, without saying goodbye. My father left early one morning, his pickup truck pulling out of the driveway without looking back. My mother was last. She didn't say another word about the bank or the paperwork. She just set the spare key on the kitchen counter and walked out the door. 2 days later, a thin envelope arrived in the mail. Inside were the garage key and the mailbox key. No note, no signature. I placed them on the wooden shelf by the front door. The sound of metal against wood rang dry and clear in the empty house. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The fireplace stayed off. The house felt bigger without footsteps or a phone buzzing on the dinner table. Streetlight spilled through the window, catching the new sign at the gate that I could see from where I sat. What had I won? A loan canceled. A lien removed. But the laughter at family dinners disappeared with it. Some wins don't come with applause. The next morning, I carried paint and a roller onto the porch. The ivory door had faded over the years. I chose a deep navy, dark, grounded, not flashy. I rolled it on in slow strokes. The new paint covered the old, hiding small scratches that had built up for years. A neighbor walked by and nodded hello. No one asked questions. When the final coat dried, the door looked steadier. Not brand new, but unmistakably mine. I stepped back and looked at the house in Savannah's late afternoon sun. It was still there. Still the place I had paid for every month. Only one thing had changed. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to acknowledge it. The bank's official notice arrived on a Monday morning. The supplemental loan was fully canceled. The lien was removed from my property record. I read that email twice, printed it, and clipped it into the Navy folder, this time under Resolved. A few weeks later, my attorney called with a brief update. RB Heritage was being reviewed by the tax authorities. Not because I requested it, but because the verification process had exposed inconsistencies. He asked if I wanted to get more involved. I said no. My part was enough. Caleb officially moved out by the end of the month. The boat sold. Quietly, no farewell, no scene. I watched it disappear from the dock on a windless afternoon. Another symbol leaving without an announcement. My father emailed me. One line, "You chose your path." No blessing. No blame. I read it in the kitchen, leaning against the granite counter I had paid off month by month. I replied with one word. Yes. There was no long conversation, no reconciliation scene in the living room. No one came back to apologize. No one asked me to change my mind. Everything closed the way a door closes softly, not slammed, but enough for you to hear the lock. Sunday dinners were gone. Check-in calls thinned out, then stopped. The house still glowed with light each night, but the dining table felt wider than before. There were things I could hold on to with paperwork, and things I couldn't. My family still existed somewhere, inside other houses, around other meals. But the family, as it used to be, the place I thought was absolutely safe, was gone. This house stayed with me. The rest, I had to learn to let go. I'm still in this house. Every month, I still sign the check myself for what's left of the mortgage. Utilities, property taxes, insurance, everything is in my name and paid on time. No one tells me I'm holding anything anymore. I'm no longer the child standing in the background to fill every financial gap. No more urgent calls asking me to sacrifice one more time. I stepped out of that role, even without a goodbye ceremony. I used to think boundaries were a separation. Now I know they're like the Navy front door, closed not to push someone out, but to protect what's inside. There are things you build with sweat and late nights, and you have the right to keep them safe. From that day on, I read every document carefully, not just the ones I sign, but the ones connected to my name. I ask one more question before I nod yes. I save every email, not because I distrust everyone, but because I respect myself more than I used to. I still miss my mother. I still remember how she would brew tea each night and set the mug down without saying a word. But I don't step back into the old role to keep a false peace. I let the distance exist, like a truth I have to accept. I didn't win completely. The family I once knew didn't come back, but I stopped letting other people rewrite my history in the name of love. The story you just heard is a fictional story, inspired by real-life situations and human experiences, meant to offer reflection and emotion for viewers. The content was supported by AI and edited by a human. This video does not encourage anyone to imitate the actions in the story. The narrator believes the greatest value isn't in beating someone, but in knowing where you stand and what truly belongs to you. If this story can offer you a small gift, maybe it's this reminder. Sometimes boundaries aren't about going against family. They're about protecting what you've built with your own hands. I'm Lisa. If you're listening to this story from a home in Texas, Florida, Ohio, or anywhere else in the United States, leave a comment and tell me where you are. Every story here begins in a real room, just like the room you're sitting in right now. If Hannah's story made you think, hit like and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories that bring value and a gentle kind of awakening. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here truly matters, and I appreciate it more than you think.